Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode. I got UNC Tar Heel Mike Schall. Can't wait for the conversation. But before we dive in, as always, wild and funny story. What you got?
Thanks, Ryan, for having me. I appreciate it. So, when I was a high school sophomore, every year I grew up in Western Pennsylvania where boys volleyball was popular and very good. In fact, the whole state of Pennsylvania. But I went to a small school. My dad was my high school coach. Every spring, one of our big events of the spring was to go to what was then called the Panther Classic. It was a tournament in York, Pennsylvania. Legendary coaches there, Bruce and Barb Kohler. It's now called the Kohler Classic, from what I understand. But we loaded the van with, our high school volleyball team. My dad was at the wheel, and he has a tendency to get kind of tired when he drives. So we made it to York. We stayed overnight at one of my dad's former players' house. His
Okay.
name's Mark Pavlik. Mark Pavlik has now been the head men's volleyball coach at Penn State for about 30 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So we stayed at Mark Pavlik's house. He was living in the York area. So imagine like a dozen high school guys along with my dad and my younger brother as well. So we're staying overnight at Mark Pavlik's house after having some pizza, the night before the tournament. Middle of the night, I hear my younger brother like just getting sick, like throwing up in the bathroom. And I'm thinking like, oh man, this is going to be a long night. So anyway, we go into the tournament, and high school volleyball tournaments are these day-long events, and they're
Yeah.
grueling. And you just play all day. And throughout the day, we just kept like nobody on our team felt great, and we just kind of struggled through the day. We get to the end of the day, we go, we sleep, we wake up the next morning, and the entire 4 hour ride home, we would stop probably every 10 miles or so because the entire team had food poisoning. So we're stopping,
Yeah.
like we're literally stopping the van along the side of the road for guys to get sick. And, finally we made it home. But we've had reunion after reunion for our high school team, and that trip comes up every single time.
Yeah.
So
You
we
had
were
your
we were survivors.
you had your own Michael Jordan moment.
Yeah, yeah. It didn't turn out, the success of our tournament didn't turn out exactly the way Michael's did. But yeah, we had the
I,
food poisoning day.
yeah. I love it. I love it. And that telling that story too is that's a good spot to open up. It makes me okay. So you mentioned dad being your coach. How was the dynamic? Because wrestling's my background, and then growing up, my dad wrestled in college, and so he introduced me to the sport, and then he coached me, and that was an interesting dynamic. So I'm curious of how did that play out for you guys?
Yeah. The Probably the benefit that I had is my dad, and I don't know if your dad was this way or not, but he um, in 1974 started the boys volleyball program.
Oh
So this
wow.
is when I was 3 years old. So it wasn't like he got involved in coaching because I was playing. I also had an older brother who was a year older than me. And as I mentioned, from the food poisoning trip, a younger brother who's 5 years younger. So we all played for him eventually, but he really had a desire. He started the program because so my dad has an interesting story. He went to Slippery Rock University.
Uh-huh.
It
Uh-huh.
does exist.
Yeah.
It was Slippery Rock State College. My dad was there, but he played baseball and soccer. And I remember years later asking him, "So you're back, like you played baseball and soccer in college." He had played volleyball in high school. I said, "Why did you start a boys volleyball team?" And he said that he felt that volleyball was the greatest sport to teach young people how to function as a team, and that's
Interesting.
why he
Yeah.
started. And so fast forward, and to answer your question, like that dynamic was I simply felt like every other guy.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like, okay, I've had special privilege, and I also didn't feel like I had this, like I had to prove myself more than anybody else. It was the way that my dad treated everybody, and he was great with the best guy on the team and the worst guy. Like it didn't matter to him.
Right.
So so he was very true to his original purpose of why he created the team, and that was to help young people to learn how to function together as a team. And I always just felt part of it. I didn't
Yeah.
feel special privilege. So
Yeah. Was it as he started it, was volleyball or men's volleyball at that time, was it as big as by the time you were in high school? And the reason I ask that too is, talking with a couple other coaches is I'm originally from Birmingham, where like volleyball is not that big. And then I moved to Dallas and I was like, whoa.
yeah,
Like my eyes were like volleyball and soccer is like these two sports that were just kind of like, I mean, they were there, right? But not at the magnitude of like when I got to Dallas. And so was it always like that, or did it kind of evolve like as you got older?
sure. It grew for sure. When I was a kid, like when he first started the program, most of the boys volleyball teams in our area were closer to the city of Pittsburgh, and we
Yeah.
were like in this rural small town about 45 miles outside of Pittsburgh. So we were a little bit of an outlier. And now, like there are many more boys teams in our area. So I would say the growth in that sport in the state of Pennsylvania has been pretty steady over time.
Yeah.
But interested, there's a lot of history behind it. But it actually started in the 1930s in
Damn.
Pennsylvania. I started in the YMCA's and then went into the high school. So it's kind of a pretty interesting history of the sport there. But the sport of volleyball in general, especially on the women's side right now, has just exploded across the country, and and it's been a great thing to see. Young women are getting even professional opportunities today, which is incredible for our sport. So there's been a lot of growth over time.
Yeah, again, similar conversation yesterday. It's just to me, it's like, again, it's an exposure thing, right? And obviously wrestling's kind of similar to that, right? Like you don't get a ton of exposure, but then when people do see it is I remember when I first um my first business had a business partner and he was from Mississippi where they didn't have wrestling. And so it's like, when he first met me, he was like, wrestling, ugh, like who does that, right?
Yeah,
Kind of type thing. And then he watched me start training kids and he was like, dude, that's like a fight with rules. And I was like, that's exactly the way to put it, right? And so it's like this exposure when he saw it for himself, it was like this new like appreciation for it. And I feel like just women's sports, obviously what happened recently with basketball and then, the whole volleyball season, just the different
yeah,
teams and the exposure. Yeah, I think it's because wrestling, even volleyball, it's like the Olympics, right? It's like that's when they get their exposure. And then other than that, there's not a whole like swimming, right? Like those are the prime ones.
yeah, yeah. Well, I certainly grew up in an area where wrestling was big in Western Pennsylvania.
Totally.
Went to school at Penn State, where they've done pretty well in that sport.
King right now.
They're unbelievable, and I'll be honest, I love March Madness. I love the NCAA basketball tournament. I love our Tar Heels here. But every year when the wrestling national championships come on, it always overlaps with either the Sweet 16 or the round
Yep.
32 something, and it always overlaps. But I always watch that,
Yeah.
and when you see a young person who achieves something that they've been basically training mentally, physically, emotionally their entire life for, and you see them win or you see them lose in the final, like there's something that gets me every time about seeing a young person fulfill their dreams or just fall short of their dreams. And I've especially enjoyed like the interviews afterwards,
Yeah.
and they talk a whole lot about like, yes, it's difficult, but there's so much joy in what they're doing, and like the accomplishment that they feel when it's all over. I think it's such a powerful message. I think that sport really encapsulates it. I
Yeah.
would never get on the mat with you, but I have great admiration for wrestlers everywhere.
Well, it's interesting too. It makes me think of it's kind of the opposite. I mean, yes, it is like a team sport in that sense, but it's just the opposite of kind of what your dad was saying of like the idea of like developing like team, like how to function within a team. And this is to me, I think, just kind of the flip side, not necessarily the opposite, but the flip side of like how to function by yourself, how to be out alone and knowing that like, and it's the blessing and the curse, right? Because you kind of have to look in the mirror afterwards, right? There's not a whole, you can't be like, well, you and you and you and you. It's kind of like, well, you right here, the finger kind of points back to you is like, did you prepare enough, right? Did you do all the things? And so I think that that's kind of the part that fascinates me. Uh,
Yeah.
and then trying to operate that within a team, right? Like that's
Yeah.
at the college level, right? That's your job, right? Like as the
Correct.
coaches to be able to to build that dynamic. It makes me think too, like when you talk about like the interviews after those is there's a saying I don't think that like my mentor like quoted this, but it's who I heard it from. It's just the idea like you always said like Ryan, winning requires you to be different, right? And that's winning in sport, winning in life, winning in relationships, whatever that looks like. And so how because just kind of like reading your bio and stuff like that prior to the conversation is you came from club, correct? Well, it's like college club, college, right? Kind of
Yep.
sort of ish.
Yep. Exactly.
Um, talk a little bit about the different requirements, quote unquote, if you will, in terms of winning from like a club standpoint to now like you get into Division 1 college athletics because from my perspective, if I'm a high school club kid, my winning is my dream of getting the scholarship, right? And going competing at the
Yeah.
next level. And then now it's something different. So what like how have you like managed those dynamics and what do those conversations look like?
Yeah. I think for me, I think the like winning is everybody's ultimate goal. Every group I've ever spoken in front of, and you ask them the question, would you rather win than lose? Like everybody wants to win.
Yeah.
We have we'll have a group of 17 players in the fall, and they all want to win. And I know, like at the college level, whether it's college club or you're coaching a 7-year-old little league baseball team, it, I think what's required is like there's never going to be a substitute for hard.
Yeah.
There is never going to be a team that is successful that doesn't care about each other.
Yeah.
And then there's also like a healthy respect for whatever the game is. Like, do I respect the game enough that even on my bad days, like I'm committed to doing the work? And I think the interesting dynamic that occurs at club, and we see it in our athletes here too, is at club you have the coach as this very like central figure, basically like, all right, here's what we need to do, and here is the list of things that we need to do. And everybody's standing around looking at this coach and like, all right, coach, tell us what to do.
Yeah.
And most coaches will do that. And I've always kind of fought that a little bit because I want part of my role as a coach, as an educator, is how do I develop these young people into, people who like they're going to be walking into boardrooms someday, or they're going to be at the front of a classroom someday, or they're going to be leading a family someday or a big company. Like they're going to be doing those things. And if I'm simply telling them what to do all the time, it's not going to work. And so, fast forward a little bit, like been my experience at club level. And now I'm a college head coach. I've been coaching for about 30 years, and I was an assistant coach at Penn State for a number of years, and then was the head coach at the club level. And now I'm, back to an assistant coach at the
Yeah.
college level, now head coach at the college level. And I still have some of the same frustrations. And I'm learning my first year. Um, like I still wanted to operate from the sense of, look, I want the players to lead. I want them to take ownership of that. And what I am is that's a process.
Yeah.
It's like running a relay. You don't just throw the baton to somebody. Like there's this period of time where you're both holding on to it.
Hmm.
And I do think one of the mistakes that I made in my first year is I wanted to hand off the baton. I wanted them to be ready to lead. And I probably, like, looking back, and reflecting on it, I didn't do enough to put things in place for them to have the confidence to leave. And so the positive thing is like we're working through that
Yeah.
this spring and working through that now and really doing a good job, doing our best job at establishing a framework with which the players can eventually take over. But we're just not ready for that yet. And so that's a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last few months.
Yeah, it two things that kind of like resonate with me, I guess, is I when I go into like start working with a team is exactly what you're saying. Like one of the hardest things you're gonna have to do is learn how to make decisions, but we need to define what that means. And so to me, it's like if you pull from like the Latin root of the word define means to cut off, right? Like from its Latin root. And so it's like when you make a decision, you're not cutting off options, right? And so it's like when you chose to come to school here, you cut off the other options, right? And I was like, and they kind of they don't believe me at first, but I'm like, okay, if five of you got in the car right now and said, hey, we're going to go get dinner. What do y'all want? It would take you 45 minutes with you and your best friends to sit in the car and decide on what you wanted for dinner, right? And so it's like teaching them, like, it just starts with little decisions, right? Like, how long can you just say, how long does it take you to make those type of decisions? And then with that, I think of the opposite side is do do your lies rule you, right? You say you're making this decision. You say you're going to get up at 7, but then you get up at 8 for the next month. Now we're like lying to ourselves. And so it's like, we don't trust ourselves as much, right? And I think that becomes like very difficult for people because it's almost subconscious, right? Like they don't even realize it. They're like, I can make decisions. I'm like, all right, what do you want to eat? And they're like, I don't know, right? Or the ultimate question of, and I'm sure that as you like came into the program and started to working on like building those connections in some form or fashion, I can almost guarantee that like your first question was like, who are you? Tell me about you, right? Like at some foundational level, and they're like, what do you want to know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Where do I start? And so it's like, I totally agree that it's like that's like the biggest challenge, I think, for people in general.
no question, no question. I think the one thing that I want to get better at over time. One thing we did just a quick exercise was we would have our players um, like share a picture that's meaningful to
Hmm.
them. I think pictures can be powerful. And so what they would do is before a practice, it would take 5 minutes, but we would put whatever picture they shared on the screen. Nobody had seen it beforehand. And they would put it up and they would describe like why that picture is meaningful to them. And so it's sort of the beginning. It's just this glimpse into
Yeah.
what's important to them and what their story is. And but one thing that I just it sounds funny, but I wish we had more time with our team, with our players. Like we have it sounds very selfish to say like we've got 20 hours a week of practice. Like, what do you do with all that time? But it never feels like enough because they
Right.
have so many other responsibilities and we're at a really great school and like all right to demand more of their time is difficult. But one thing that I'm super curious about and want to do a better job of is really helping players to be able to articulate their story better.
Yeah.
And so when you give that glimpse with a picture, it's like, all right, so what else is behind that and how does that affect you? And talking about their families and where they've come from, even their volleyball experiences. And so it it just speaks to like what we're about as a program. Like we want to win like everybody else, as we
Right.
talked about, but we want to do it in a way where kids finish their careers and they come back and like can't wait to see their best friends that they've been through a lot with throughout their college career.
Yeah. It and you can tell me is that I love that exercise. it almost seems more powerful for the person presenting than the team because it's like now they have to like, okay, like what is meaningful to me, right? And so like identity is my jam, right? I always say it's like you don't get what you want, you get who you are. But if you don't know who you are, then it's very difficult to go out and get the things you want because you're probably not being the person, right? And so that is like just a powerful example, I think, of like, okay, how do I find this picture and articulate why it touches me, like what it means, like who it is, who's my identity, story, and everything else. And so, yeah, it almost seems, and that may be the purpose of it, right? Like it
Yeah.
it, it forces them to be able to articulate those things.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. I mean, we've had kids break down,
Yeah,
sharing why it's meaningful to them. We would also do it with, like, if we have, for example, our compliance guy, came in. I still remember what he brought. Like, our kids see him once a year.
right.
He'll do his opening of the year meeting, and then, of course, unless something goes sideways, they're never seeing compliance.
Yeah. Hopefully, we're not seeing him again.
And but he came in, he brought in like this little thing that his son did at school, and it was like, dad, like things that I hear my dad say all the time. It was like, I love you. And for Nate, it was
Uh,
just like, holy
oh,
smokes, like I don't need anything more than this. Like,
yeah.
so you those things are memorable, stick with people, and I think, you know if identity, we have a shared maybe jam that we want kids to uncover who they are, and help to bring out all the good stuff inside them, because they tend to be their own worst critics, and we want to bring the good stuff out.
Yeah, yeah, and I just feel like that solves so many, when I say issues, I just mean like emotional issues because like as I go in is and I'll ask a team, specifically like female teams too. I'm like, what's the number one emotion that you feel throughout the day? From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. Like what's typically the number one emotion? And I would say 99% of the time it's like it's always stress, right? Or worry or anxiety. I kind of lump those stress, worry, anxiety a little bit together. And so I was like, isn't that fascinating though? I was like, fill in this blank. Everyone told you before you came here college was supposed to be, and they're like, the time of my life. And I was like, you feel stressed the majority of your day. I was like, that's our hurdle. We'll get to the performance side of things, but if we can manage this right now, and it
Yeah,
doesn't have to be that you're never going to feel stress, right? It's like, how do we tip the scales to
yeah,
51%, to 52%, to where it like your day just becomes a little more enjoyable, to where you look forward to practice and you look forward to connecting with your teammates and having those conversations like with your coaches because like it should be fun.
yeah, yeah. But is it most of the time? Probably. And I think so much of that is, um, like, the preparation ahead of time, is that we'll have kids come in the summer, and it's been something that that we're we're getting better at managing. The kids come in summertime, that's what they're thinking, like, this is going to be the time of my life. And then they come here and they're sitting in a dorm room with a roommate that they've probably never met before.
Right.
Meanwhile, they've never shared a room in their life. And here I'm going to share one with a perfect stranger. And oh, by the way, like, there aren't 20,000 people on campus. There are maybe 2,000 people on campus. And, you know, the dining hall may not have their full menu. They have a partial. It's like all of these things hit at once, and it looks nothing like what they were expecting. And so, our job to get ahead of that is a challenging one. But yeah, we want them to look back and say, like, it was hard, but this was the best thing that I've ever.
Yeah. Because ultimately, I mean, haha, identity again, right? Like, I heard somebody say this of like, ultimately it's like you are your asset, and through those experiences, you're building you, right? So that when you walk away from there, even if you have a national title under your belt or whatever the things are, it's like, yeah, but I've developed this monster, so to speak, right? This, kind of like we were joking about like before we even like hit record today. It's like I'm gonna get on here, like I'm gonna own it, right? Like that kind of type thing of for them to walk away and have that confidence to where they can walk in the boardroom, right? Or they can start their own business. They can do all those things to where, because to me, like, that's just felt, right? Like when you walk in a room, it's like you you don't actually have to be the smartest, but you have to be sure of yourself, right? Like
Yeah.
I think that would be step one to any interview or I,
Yep.
I mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but like that's like recruiting 101, right? When a kid walks on campus, like how sure they are of themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's like we want kids who like, and we work on it here. We'll say to our kids a lot, like, know who you are when you walk into the room. And we have one of our rising seniors who has been a great leader for us. She's not on the court all the time, but she's just one of those kids that when she walks into the room, and she will talk about this. In fact, I've been with her when she's speaking in front of groups, like leadership groups,
Yeah.
and she will say, like, our coaches talk all the time about, like, know who you are when you walk into the room. And for her, like, it will pay off, because I think the rest of our team will be working for her someday. um,
Yeah.
she's doing an internship at Nike this summer, and
Yeah. Yeah.
just she's got a lot going for her, but it's something that she's worked really hard at. And I think to be able to be part of facilitating that growth for young people is kind of like this honorable responsibility that we all share.
Yeah. And again, we were joking like before, but I think that was my learning experience of like having these conversations like on the show, right? Like at the beginning, it was like essentially it's like I was making all these bullet points because I was unsure, right? Like, and now my wife is like, do you know these people? I'm like, no, I don't. And she's like, how do you know what you're gonna ask? I'm like, nah, I don't. Like, we literally just hit record and then here we are, right? And so it's like, but I think that like self-awareness buzzword, whatever we want to call it, it's like I don't know, but I just know that like there's enough things to talk about. It's like let's find a way to connect early on and then like we'll just see where the conversation goes. And I think that that's again essentially it's like sports too a little bit, right? Like you're yes, you're watching film and you're understanding opponents, but at the same time, it's about you, right? Like 80 to 90% of it is like, we got to be us. Now we're going to tweaks and adjustments and sharpen things up here and there to be able to perform the best, or like they might do things a little bit differently. But at the same time, it's like, we don't change who we are, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, we've all seen like different sports that have uh, these really strong identities that go. Uh, let's face it, like at the highest levels, talent is pretty evenly distributed. And who is it that's ultimately going to win? It's typically the team that understands who they are. And I think about sports teams like, I mean, Penn State wrestling's a good example. Like, what is it about them? Like, they have an identity to them. The New England Patriots, who were great. Um, I'd get, you know, I'd get heckled from my friends who I grew up with in Western Pennsylvania if I didn't say, like, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like, when they
yeah, yeah,
were in their
yeah.
heyday, it was like they had this identity. It was the Steel Curtain.
Steel curtain, yeah.
And, you think about the Carolina basketball, and there's like the family, the Carolina family, and that stuff is real. And so I think that one of the challenges now that college coaches face is, yes, we're working through that on an individual basis, but truly year to year, it's like this 1 year project.
Yeah.
And you have to have it together as a staff. Like, this is who we are. These are the kind of players we want to attract. But once you have them, it's like, how can we very quickly help them to understand who we are, and and help them also to understand this is what's going to translate to success on the court. Yes, you have to have talent. You have to be able to understand the X's and O's, but ultimately it comes down to, like, okay, who are we, and what's going to get us through the tough spots here.
Yeah. Yeah. And not wavering from like having the trust in yourself of like not wavering from that. I'll never forget again, kind of a losing moment. Like for me, it was my junior year um in college, and I mean absolutely got my butt kicked in a wrestle off. I mean, just bad, right? And I'll never forget going over it was like kind of before practice and walking over to the associate coach and just saying like what do I need to do? And he just like, you made that way too big. Like literally. It was like you literally changed like I how are you trained in here and like what you did out there it's just completely different. He's like, you would have thought like you were like wrestling for like a national title out there. You put so much, like you made that way bigger than it was, right? And so it's like all of a sudden, like he saw me as like in terms of like my competitive identity, just like different being out there. And I think that was like a hurdle and like watching athletes. I'm like, no, like that was not you.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah.
So
We
how
we've
does
all we've all seen it.
yeah, how does this translate into being dad?
Oh man. Yeah.
I'm asking for my own personal advice too, because I got in a week I got a 2-year old. So
Oh, and love it. Oh, you're in the like physically exhausting stage of parenting.
yeah.
And so I'm the father of four children. My wife and I have four kids, and the oldest is 22, ready to graduate from college.
Oh yeah, so you've been through it. Like you like
Oh yeah, and the way we have them spaced out, it's like we've been through it and we're still going
going
through
through
it.
it.
So we have a 22-year-old daughter, 20-year-old son, 16-year-old son, and 14-year-old daughter.
Okay.
And that what's it's just, parenting is the best thing that we've ever done. And it teaches you a lot. Teaches you that you're never going to have it all figured out, but
That's
you're always going to do the best that you possibly can. And even within our own family, do you guys just have one? So
yeah, we're just solo dolo.
not all right, no pressure. But what's so interesting about the dynamic of our kids, my wife and I joked about it as they were growing up, and you could start to really sense what their personality was. Each of them, if you were to like take any, I don't know what, like the DISC assessment, for
Yeah,
example,
yeah.
like just as one example, there are usually like four things you could be. We have one in each of those. Like each of our children
Yeah, yeah,
is
yeah.
one of those, and none of them are the same. And it's just been such a meaningful journey, being a dad and helping them to start to figure out who they are, what they like, and what makes them tick. And they're all different in their personalities and how they respond to things, yet they function well together. And so it's like, I don't know, I feel like I'm coaching all the time. And whether I'm home or whether I'm here at Carolina, it's just uh it's been the greatest journey.
Yeah, and it has to be like I'm just such a big believer in like product of environment, right? Like the environment. And so that has to be like super unique is for I mean, I don't know, I just put it bluntly, like to grow up around just groups of high achievers, right? Whether that's college high achievers, club high achievers, it's like that's a unique experience that not everybody. It's kind of like like because you can call like college coaching like the Wild West, right? Like, it's like it's running and gunning 24/7. If you're not in season, you're recruiting and you're doing this and you're planning for things and you're just go
Yeah,
go 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 kind of. But at the same time, it's like it does have like to me it's like perception, right? A little bit. And
yeah,
so it's like I think the ability to um like see those things is like super powerful, especially like at a young age.
yeah, yeah.
For them to like
No
grow up in that.
no question. It's been great for our kids to I have this picture, and this goes back to the days that I was coaching in club and running a club here in Raleigh. But um, my youngest daughter Mia, I think was 2 at the time. There's a picture. I'm holding her like I had finished coaching in this tournament in Atlanta, and I was holding her. And fast forward 12 years later, and we were just in Atlanta a month ago, and she was playing in that same tournament. And for our kids to grow up to see um, people who are doing things, not just performing on the court at a really high level, but how do they carry themselves? And
Yeah.
there's a distinct difference between those who become really successful, and those who just sort of exist out there. And you know, kind of drill in from the parenting side. We talk about like, well, what are the behaviors of these people who are successful, and what is it that they do that is different than somebody equally as talented but not as successful? And so I think that applies whether you're raising children or coaching a team. I think it all. I think there's transfer among the two.
Yeah, yeah, and I also like the other one I lump with you talk about like what are the behaviors? It's like the beliefs too. And so it's like as they get right, because like mine right now is basically a sponge, right? Like she just absorbs of like whatever's around her. And so it's like even the athletes like that I'm around is like I think that's a big part of like growth and identity is like why do you believe what you believe? And I think that's like just a powerful thing. It's like, there's people this is the example I always give. I just think it's an easy example of like people deeply involved like in their faith. And if I go like, hey, like, why do you believe in God? And you go, well, like, because my parents made me go to church on Sunday, then it's probably not an ideal answer, right? And so it's like it's just understanding, like again the picture example. I think that's a great like frame of like okay, I put this up here. It's like why do I believe this? Because at some point those beliefs came from teachers, coaches, parents, peers, and so it's just like making sure that like they're your values, right? There's not somebody else's like instilled in you.
Yeah, yeah, no question. And I think, you've touched on faith, and I think that is, I think when I was interviewing for the head coaching job here, and I took a risk in sharing this quote with our athletic director because I'm like, I don't know if this is help or not, but I remember reading this in a book where it kind of ties into my faith, but the quote is, "I don't know where I'm, but I know exactly how I'm going to get there." And my coaching journey has been, as you mentioned, like I was a 23-year-old assistant coach at Penn State University,
Oh,
and I was coaching players who were like
your
actually
age.
actually I started as a student assistant, so I was 19 coaching. Most of the team was older than I was, and so that was the beginning of it. And I was at Penn State for about 15 years, and then um, when our two older kids were young, I just knew, we were on the verge of winning probably multiple national championships, which ended up happening, and I stepped away from it. And I just knew, like, I just had this piece
Yeah.
about that this was the right time for us to step away. And I loved what I did. I loved the experience. I loved our head coach and the staff and the players, and I loved everything about it. But there was just this piece about it, like it was time to do something different. And then usually when that happens, when somebody steps away from college coaching, it's kind of like I'm not sure they're ever going to get back in. I wasn't really looking to do it, but when I was coaching club, um, and then had the opportunity, we had moved to North Carolina when our kids were 1, 3, 7, and 9, and we knew nobody. And
Yeah.
there's a deeper story in that, but like we knew nobody here, and it was just the greatest adventure we ever done. And we were my wife and I were talking one day. We were talking about like, okay, am I going to continue to coach club? And I loved it. And then I said there was only one place that I would consider getting back into college coaching. And no lie, 3 weeks later, I got a call from the head coach at the time, Joe Segula, from Carolina. And he said, my staff, he had an assistant who became the head coach at Tennessee, and then the other assistant went with her. And it was like, I have an opening on my staff. And he was kind of running through this list of people that he was considering. And then at the end of the conversation, he said, well, what about you? And I was kind of like, I took a deep breath and I said, well, I I told Sarah I would, at least entertain the conversation, and it's worked out great since then. But then being an assistant and applying to be the head coach, like um, it was just a great journey. But it's meaningful to know that you have people here who believe in you and what you're doing, and
Yeah.
a group of kids that they're committed to wanting to be the very best that they can be.
it I'm stealing this. He's the assistant wrestling coach at Iowa State that had a conversation, shared a conversation with, and along you telling your story is it makes me think of he said something that really stuck with me. He was just like, he's like, your heart never lies, right? And so it's like as you kind of like walked away from Penn State, it was like a feeling, right? Like there's this feeling in me. It was like now's the time, right? And nobody understands, right?
Yeah,
Like
it, that is so true. That is so true. And even like colleagues, it was kind of like it was career suicide. Like
right.
you're walking away from that program, they're gonna win. They actually went on to win. Like when I was there, we won one national championship, and I think after I left, they won six more. So
Whoa.
so maybe that was the key is I had to leave so
Yeah.
they could get some things done. But it was like we had just great incoming recruiting classes and a great roster. But it was just time. And I think there was again like there was a piece about it. There was the heart doesn't lie. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
exactly right. And I think every step of our coaching journey, um, as a family, and I also shared when I was interviewing her, I said every decision that I've ever made as a professional has been rooted in like what is best for our family in this current season. Because you're gonna learn like there are current seasons and they go very quickly
Yeah.
and you don't get them back.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to sacrifice like my kids not really knowing who I was. And so it turns out for the best. And I think when your decisions are rooted in what's most important to you, I think it you know our our story and our coaching journey together has been proof of that in our
Yeah. And I feel like maybe this is the positive poly side of me, but like I feel like people in general like are good, like good hearted, like people like I just feel like most people. And so what makes me think of like that side of your story is like if you're just honest and like upfront of like say I'm interviewing for a job, right? And it's like yes, we're gonna win, but not at all costs because I'm unwilling. Here's the three things like I'm unwilling to sacrifice, right? Or two things or one thing, right? Like if it's just your family. It's like if you're okay with this, like I will give everything aside from this. If like it makes me great example, right? Like Scheffler from the Masters, right? Like the whole storyline was
lives.
just like, if his wife goes into labor, he's like, I'm out, right? And
Yeah,
so it's like there's a line that kind of like everyone has, but I don't I feel like most people aren't. I don't know if it's bold, confident, sure, right? Kind of comes back to identity of just saying like, I'll do it up to this point. And it's
yeah,
interesting. Again, going back to the Iowa State coach, he was just like, he's got four kids too, and he was just like competed at a high level, competed internationally, and then he's like, then I had kids, and he was like, I would do anything, and then it was like, family came.
yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly. There's conviction. What is it that is you're convicted about? Like that remains most important. It was funny. The whole the guy at the Mass, Scotty Scheffler. I told I think we had a lot of things going on. We basically turned it on when he was being interviewed, and my wife was asking me like, what's the story here, and I told her, and she was like, "Duh, he better leave." Like everybody was celebrating like this this great example of and my wife was like, "I hope he leaves." So yeah,
Yeah, and then you got like all the I don't I want to say single, but probably like unmarried and definitely without kids, right? Like I think that's the um that's the ultimate domino, right? Of like again, it's going back to and like you don't know those are moments you can never get back. And I think the fearful side too is I had kind of a coach tell me this. He's got one young one too, and it was like you never know like when little instances are going to end. So for
Yeah.
example, is like my little daughter will come like grab my hand and like try to pull me off the couch, like, come on, let's play. Come on, let's play. Someday I'm like, bro, I do not want to play right now. Right.
Yeah.
But then in the back of my head, I'm like, I don't know when that moment's going to end of her grabbing versus she's like 16, got a car, is like,
Yeah.
bye, dad.
Yeah.
So that makes me think of like a buzz phrase, right? Being present. I mean, that's got a lot of meaning now. Kind of, I think it's a little bit overused, but like you just don't know when those moments, and relating it to sports too, right? Like
Yeah.
it's kind of the same thing of, especially as kids, young adults come to you, it's like we've got this 4 year ish window,
Mhm.
right? Like, and what is it that you want and the things that you're willing to like invest in yourself to be able to get from point A to point B.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because death of the athlete is coming.
Yeah. No question. And that's something that it's hard to give the perspective to like kids who are in the middle of it because they think like I've got all this time and it's hard and I'm working hard and this is like I'm on this hamster wheel of being a college athlete and then the next thing you know it's over. And we're we've been pretty intentional, but even more so, we had an alumni weekend this past weekend. We had some alumni in town, just hearing them talk about their experiences. And we're like, we need to get them in front of our players a lot more
Yeah.
often because they just add this perspective that we can't add as coaches because we're wanting them to perform, we're wanting them to be their best. And it's like when you have somebody in front of them who's lived their life and for them to say this goes a lot faster than you think like that carries a lot more weight than us trying to get the most out of them every day.
Yeah, they think you have a motive, right? Like, yeah, of course you're
Yeah.
saying that because you want to win. You want to do all the things, right?
Yeah.
It's same as like I'm sure you've told your kids something 100 times and then they go to a different practice, like, you're not gonna believe what coach told me, right? Like
Yeah. Genius. That coach is
yeah.
a genius, right? That person over there, they're brilliant.
So,
Right.
was your wife, is she have volleyball background?
Yeah, she played at a Division II school in Pennsylvania, Lock Haven University.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, big wrestling
yeah,
school.
for sure.
Yep, yep. And so she was there, and then we got married. We lived in State College, like when we were first married. Had our first two kids there. So my wife's done a lot of like personal. She's a health coach now. Like she actually did a little bit of volleyball coaching. Was a high school coach, and
Yeah.
so she certainly understands like the lifestyle and all that goes into it. And she's just she's a great person for me to talk to. She gives me perspective, and she's talking to clients all day, talking about their habits and things that they can get. Just gives them a different perspective, and she certainly does that for me. Sometimes I don't want to hear it, like I don't want to be coached, and I just want to hear like, "Hey, you're doing a good job. Just keep going." And but she's really good about that. So yeah, she has a background in it and understands the demands of it from our side too.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of like actually before I met my wife um and I had my business partner, he was just like, I remember him telling me like before I was dating anybody, obviously before I even met my wife, he was just like, I think you're gonna end up needing to like be around like another athlete that just like understands, right?
Yeah.
Like because at that time we were running a sports performance facility and it was just like it's the same thing, right? It's just run and gun, hustle and bustle kind of type thing, especially like building something literally from my parents' basement into like what it was. And so it was like he's just like people aren't going to understand you, and so I feel like there's
Yeah.
just like a good dynamic of like especially somebody who's like a college athlete, right? Like
Yeah.
there's just, and it doesn't even matter because my wife was a Division III athlete, and so it's like it doesn't even matter the level, so to speak, is it's
Yeah.
like they
Sure.
all have like their own demands.
Oh my. What was her sport?
Gymnastics, believe it or
Okay.
not. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So it made me think of, because you talked about your dad how volleyball builds the best function, like as a team, is I have this perspective or this opinion, I guess, is gymnastics is the best early on to just like understand your body,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
being able to when we had the sports performance we gym, we'll call it like gym.
mhm.
And business partner, he played football, and so he would have like NFL players come in and like during the warm up, he'd be like, do a cartwheel. And they were like, bro, I can't do a cartwheel. He was like, you make $30 million and you can't do a cartwheel, right? And so it was just interesting. It was again just the exposure to it. I was like, man, that is actually fascinating that you're that good of an athlete, but just like how much better body awareness. So we like started incorporating stuff like that, just
Yeah,
little like rolls and cartwheels and handstands and just understand the body.
for sure. Yeah. Well, you and your wife have to, you were a wrestler, she was a gymnast. It's like talk about two sports that like your
We're
kids will be
doomed.
like committed to whatever it is. Like, yeah, that's
and
awesome.
and now she coaches gymnastics, so the little one just like grows up in the gym
Oh,
too. So that's why I can like I almost I don't know if envy is like, but I see like with what your kids like went through and just being around that environment and like what just in a year since we've been
yeah,
here in Georgia of like what it's done for her just to be around just high school kids, right?
yeah,
Like it doesn't even have
the
to be
best.
these high level superstars.
Yeah, yeah, love it.
Very fascinating. Very fascinating. So did you always know? I know you kind of said like it, because I was gonna ask this specifically. You kind of touched on it. Did you know you wanted to get back into college, or was that just kind of like one of those moments again?
Yeah. Um, I was not looking to do it. And when we were, what brought us to North Carolina was there's a volleyball club in Raleigh called Triangle Volleyball Club. And it wasn't just the fact that it was this big club who had
Mm-hmm.
success. It was about who they were, like who they are as an
Yeah.
organization, their whole mission statement.
Did you know them when you were coaching at Penn State? Have you
Yeah,
kind of
good
recruited in the
question.
area? Yeah.
Yeah, knew of the club. We had recruited players from there, and their mission statement is educating the whole person through excellence in the sport of volleyball. And it's probably one of the most mission focused organizations that there is. They don't stray from that. And so honestly, um, my wife and I had always had this interest in this, like in living in North Carolina. Neither of us are from. I'm from
Yeah.
Pennsylvania. She grew up in Florida. I think maybe we had been to North Carolina one time, but we always had this perception, like, what a great place that would be, to live and raise a family, not having any like connection to it really. And when we were in Pennsylvania, that there was an opportunity that came up, and I like reached out about it, and we got to talking with them. We just knew like, all right, we're going for it, and
Yeah.
we down here, and um, that was in 2011. And I'll give you a quick version of the story, but it's just one of the most, I guess, kind of stake in the ground moments where you're like, we don't know if this is going to be the right move for us. We have no idea, but we're doing it anyway. And shortly before we moved from Pennsylvania, my youngest daughter Mia was we she had just turned 1, and she wasn't speaking clearly, like she was making
Yeah.
sound, but wasn't forming words. And my wife and I are just like, we've been through like fourth child. She'll figure it. Like everybody's doing something for her. She'll figure this out. And we moved in like June of 2011. So she was about a year and a half. And we just knew there was something wrong. Like she wasn't responding. Like she would be walking in the grocery store, and we would call her name. It took her a while to respond and turn around, and like something's off here. And so we get seen by an audiologist as quickly as we possibly could. Again, not knowing anybody, we're just on the phone, like, is
Yeah.
somebody help? And they said, well, we can refer you, like, we need to refer. They knew there was a problem. They said, we need to refer you to either UNC or Duke. And well, we're like, well, that's an easy choice. Like, send us to Carolina. No, Both
Yeah.
both groups are great, but the first opening was at UNC Medical Center. And so I remember my wife coming over. We had to go through this series, like over the course of a couple months, this series of tests for Mia. And ultimately, it was determined that she had progressive hearing loss, where when she was an infant, like she could hear sound. And for whatever reason, we later determined it must have been some sort of virus that she
Hmm.
had, maybe even when my wife was pregnant, that had caused her hearing to steadily decrease. And so that's why she was making sound but not forming. And we go to the UNC Medical Center and they're like, well, we need to fit her with hearing aids to start. Let's see how that goes. And then I'll never forget the doctor's name was Dr. Oliver Adunka. He's not here anymore, but he was sitting down with my wife and I, and Mia was in the room. Mia was like, maybe 2 by this time. And he said, we want you to know, like, this is what your daughter has, but our vision for this child together is that she develops perfect hearing and perfect speech. And I remember looking at him, I said, you just said like she can't hear, and this is your vision. He looked right at me and he said, we're the #1 hospital in the United States at uh, putting cochlear implants in infants. And so this all happened within
Oh,
like
damn.
6 months of us moving to North. And we're sitting there like, that's why we're here. And
Yeah.
her life
I just
has
got chills.
her I get them every time I tell the story, but like her life, changed in that moment. And so ultimately she was fitted with cochlear implants. I don't know if you're familiar with, some people are familiar, some people
Yeah.
have no experience with them, but basically there's a device that she hears as close as possible to the way you and I hear. And she has to put it on every day and take it off at night when she's totally deaf at night. And but her when she turned 10 years old, like she was in public schools and she would get speech therapy, and when she turned 10 years old, she brings a certificate home. Her speech therapist at school was basically like, she no longer needs our services because she has perfect hearing and perfect speech. And we're kind of like, all right, we have no control here.
Yeah.
um, so that whole thing, and I know I got kind of on a tangent, but that's
No,
what
no, no.
ultimately brought us here. And in the midst of all this, I'm working at this club that I loved and people I loved, and we truly said, like, we're not leaving here. And that's why it's like, all right, if I ever have an opportunity, I would consider it, but I don't have to go anywhere.
Yeah.
But then when that opportunity came up at Carolina, just again, it felt right. It was the right fit, and I knew it was a step that we had to take. We never moved, like we haven't moved since we came to North Carolina. So it's been a great journey.
Yeah. That's wild. Wild. How'd you and your wife meet? In Pennsylvania?
Yeah, she was playing at Lock Haven. I was coaching. I just started coaching at Penn State, and I actually tried to set her up with my younger brother, and it didn't work. And I'm very happy that it
Yeah.
never worked with my brother.
That's
So
hysterical. That's
yeah,
hysterical.
yeah,
And then how far is Lockhaven from State College?
like 30 miles.
Oh, okay, so it's super close. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm
yeah,
not going back to our previous. I'm not geographic. I know the schools in the states. I can match them up a little bit.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so I went to school at WVU, so I'm kind of
Okay.
familiar. Yeah.
Yep.
We had a large group on our team. I don't know what direction, but right outside Pittsburgh, Cannon McMillan High School.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Had a
Yep.
bunch of kids from Cannon Mac. And then obviously like Jersey, Ohio. That
Yeah.
that little
Yep.
triangle of wrestling right there.
Oh, it's a hotbed for that sport.
I love it. I love it. All right, last question for you. I didn't lob you the alley oop on this one. So you're on the spot.
Yep.
All right. So if you're in a stadium with 100,000 people and you could only leave them with one message, what would your message be?
Uh, I think that. each of us has a unique gift that we bring, and uh, we shouldn't hide that gift.
Mm,
And uncovering what it is sometimes takes a lot of work, but but I really, especially in my work with young people, but I know plenty of adults who are still hiding that gift,
yeah.
and I want to help people bring that gift to the table a lot more than maybe we have the confidence to do.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. It makes me think of too, um, a lot of people say, I don't wholeheartedly agree with. A lot of people say like find your passion. I don't know that that's something that's just like found. I feel like it's something that's developed. And
Yeah,
so it's like as you get going, right? Like we got to start to uncover those pieces that it just kind of oddly enough, right? It just kind of starts to like puzzle piece together as we just but we have to be willing to kind of go out on faith a little bit and step out and just put ourselves out there and say, it's like my journey began as a strength and conditioning intern at University of South Alabama, right? And I like would have never puzzled this piece of it together.
yeah,
And so that just kind of like makes me think of is like take a step out there and like it'll unfold. Like
absolutely.
it'll unfold like for you. So yeah. Awesome, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate the
Ryan,
stories.
this was a blast.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me on, and your work is really important. So keep going.
I love it. I love it. Until next time, everybody. Peace.